question is just around the role that Auckland plays. Quite obviously, Auckland's participation is pretty fundamental to the overall credit rating. We're the best there is, and we're the substantial part. Any comment around that on the...
Equal best.
Say again?
Equal best.
Equal best, sure. Any comment around the relationship that gives us with the other councils and obviously government?
Well, I guess there's several lenses. The other guarantors who are members of LGFA are also looking through us at you, so they're interested in what you're doing. You also have an interest in making sure that our credit systems and funding is also meeting your needs as a guarantor, so we are mutually holding hands together. Clearly there are pressures from some of our members who are high growth councils who are facing the debt to covenant ceilings that Auckland Council's grappling with and are working with the Crown on other solutions. The Crown is also talking to us about our view of debt capacity in the sector, and we're very helpful and willing to assist the Crown in coming to conclusions that are good for you and for other local authorities as well as LGFA.
Thank you.
Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, I'm interested in your slide number 5, and I won't for one moment pretend to be a high finance guy, because I'm not. But given the fact that we can borrow, which our borrowing is capped at 40%, we're 7.3% short of that. Would there be an advantage for us to retire some of the higher cost debt that we have and borrow more from LGFA?
Okay, sounds simple, sounds a good piece of advice. The issue that you have, I think, is that you have got an ongoing borrowing requirement.
Yep.
So I think that you have to allow for some headroom. So you don't want to be fully maxed out at 40% of LGFA in case markets suddenly close and you need some more funding. So I think you've got to keep a buffer in there. And then secondly also, there's two parts to the equation obviously, is the amount of that you're intending to borrow and also the amount that the sector is intending to borrow as well. So if the sector doesn't borrow any more going forward, then obviously you're capped at that amount. So you don't want to be up at 40% and suddenly see that the sector is actually retiring debt and then you cannot borrow anymore. So it is prudent to actually have a buffer, a headroom. And I think it's fair to say that your Treasury team look at it in a portfolio approach of you've got some offshore sources, you've got some domestic sources of funding, you've got some LGFA. You've got to take a very long term and a very portfolio approach to it rather than taking a short term approach. Let's just retire the most expensive debt and borrow from the cheapest lender.
Okay, so so the 7.3% headroom that we currently have, is that within the area of prudence, or could we afford somewhat more?
That's a great question, Councillor. So that there's a hard cap of 40%, and the issue that we've canvassed with the Mayor, the CEO and the finance team is what's an appropriate soft cap. Yep. So that's a decision that the executives will have to come to around how do we make sure we've got capacity for a rainy day, and is that soft cap 33%, 35%, 37%, bearing in mind the alternative standby lines that you may have with banks, for example. So I think that's one issue. The other lens I would look at is if we are the cheapest source of funds for you in the mid and long term dates, you should be thinking about borrowing your longest maturities through us. Yeah. And use other sources of more expensive funds potentially in the shorter dated. So I think there's a portfolio discussion still to happen.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that we need some advice from our team at some stage on this.
John, would you like to comment?
Yes, sorry, through you, Chair. What we currently do is that the LGFA borrows in tranches, which matches the government bond maturities. So the first big maturing tranche is 2017, December this year, which we have a portion of that funding. Now, what we do to make sure we remain within that 40% cap is we assume that we want to refinance our share of the 2017 maturities through the LGFA, but the other councils, for whatever reason, don't. So we back solve that to make sure that if that occurred, we would still remain within the 40%. So that's how we at the moment leave that buffer, which is required to be sort of 6.5%, 7%.
Thank you. Yeah, Goff.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair, and thanks Mark and Craig for your presentation, which is really helpful. Two questions, one quite simple. In terms of our role as a guarantor, we're a major guarantor. Can you quantify for us the level of risk that might pose for us? The second one is kind of a loaded question, really. Obviously, Auckland's credit rating is important to your credit rating, and if we exceed our debt to revenue ratio, and we're downgraded, you would be downgraded, and neither you nor us want that to happen. I'm just wondering, therefore, it really follows on from Wayne Walker's question, whether you are happy to be an advocate for us in relation to the Housing Infrastructure Fund to make it clear to government. I think they're clear, but all the pressure we can helps that, you know, the money advanced through the Housing Infrastructure Fund can't be by way of debt if that pushes us over the debt to revenue ratio. I just, you know, some people in government are aware of that. I'm surprised at some levels of the bureaucracy that they're not, and I'm just wondering what discussions you've had with the bureaucracy around that question.
Maybe on the guarantor piece, and Mark will add to this, but to our knowledge, no local authority in New Zealand has ever defaulted. So that's helpful history.
Yep.
Where there is or have been issues, it's worthy to note the role of the Crown in stepping in and appointing commissioners. What that does under our deeds is to trigger an event or review, and we'll sit down with a council that is in breach or potentially in breach of its LTP to discuss how to come back within those covenants. In practice, our observation over the 5 years since we've been lending to the sector is that LTPs are generally optimistic views of borrowing and capital expenditure. In practice, each year they generally come beneath those LTP predictions, which is helpful. But to help you with our understanding of looking after guarantors, we have a full-time credit analyst in the business who solely looks at council balance sheets and covenants, and we visit councils each year to understand what those plans are. We also are an advocate for independent chair people on audit committees of local authorities to make sure there's an independent view brought to council deliberations. Did you want to add to that, Mark?
So you value in your accounts a contingent liability at zero, which all other councils do as well too under the guarantee, and there's lots of good reasons for that. Primarily it's a two-stage process. One is, well, what are the constraints on councils to ensure that they don't go into a financial distress or default situation, and we all know about that. But then secondly also, we only lend secured to a council. So it then becomes a timing issue as to how quickly we can then assess additional rates to reclaim back the money when it's due from a council. So that's why you know, you do get sign-off from your auditors that the contingent liability is small.
Thank you.
On the HIF, Mayor, we have been approached by Department of Internal Affairs, Treasury, MBIE on HIF, and we've made it very clear to the high growth councils who are eligible for HIF funding by way of a letter to make sure, and this has been copied to Treasury and other officials, to make sure that everyone understands our concerns, which are the sector's capacity for increased debt under the covenants is limited, and we will be enforcing those covenants, which is our role on behalf of all guarantors. So the key is to search for other solutions that are not necessarily debt. And we've been very helpful, very willing to assist those involved in designing solutions to come to a better conclusion than simply loading more debt on the sector.
Thank you. That's very helpful to us.
Very helpful indeed. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Look, congratulations, gentlemen, on your rating. Well done. And on your presentation. I suppose everyone's worried about if we should lose our AA rating. I'm kind of interested in if any council in New Zealand has actually got a AA plus rating, and potentially if is it within our scope to try to aim high?
Okay, well, to answer that question, no, there's a cap because of the sovereigns at AA plus. You can't be, and actually the sovereign is AA plus offshore, but AA domestically, so you cannot be, as a council, have a higher credit rating than central government, because the rating agencies take the view that central government has the ability to tax until the cows come home, and so therefore, and they've also got the ability to put in place foreign currency controls to the point where they can then, and they can also go into default. So, and not be sued for that. So therefore, you'll never get a credit rating higher than the sovereign.
We're as high as we can go, basically.
You're as high as you can go, yes. Okay.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Just in terms of borrowing related to share of guarantee, if we borrow more, does that change the share of guarantee, or is it not related? I mean, I'm looking at the figures, some of it's a bit related, but...
No, to answer your question, no, it's not. The guarantee is apportioned out according to your share of the total rates revenue of all the guarantors. So what's interesting there, obviously, is Christchurch has borrowed twice its guarantee, but that's because of the rebuild going on. And then you'll find that the other growth councils are also borrowing probably above their relative share, which is what you'd expect as well.
Okay, I've got some more questions. So you just, one of the questions was do we have that near 2.4 billion contingent liability we don't on our books, but you were saying we don't.
You value it
as a guarantor.
You value it at zero because there's lots of steps and lots of protection for you.
Anybody would have to do that.
Yeah, to actually.
And the other question was, I mean, we know when we nearly didn't have an LTP a couple of years ago. Is that because when you talked about being 60% of the bond market and how fragile that was, that we got a lot of people very concerned? Is that part of the reason how, why it's so important to actually have a legal LTP? Because it will ruin the bond market, basically.
Well, yes, I suppose so, but probably in a roundabout way, you're such an important part of the New Zealand Stock Exchange, and that you're subject to continuous disclosure obligations and other obligations as a listed borrower on the exchange, then it's it's very important to maintain best practice when it comes to financial management.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. That's really informative and useful and relevant. So, someone move the thanking Craig and Mark for their presentation. Councillor Simpson, seconded by Councillor Cashmore. All those in favour?
Aye.
Very much.
Sure, and good morning. Thank you.
Right, we now have